Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first edition of the Wednesday Build. This is episode 1.1, and today's topic is The Cat is Fine, the power of curiosity and wonder to drive innovation and creativity in no-code, low-code development. We will be featuring today the lovely coding cat GIF and myself, Brittany Hernandez. So my friend Emily calls me B, so you'll see me refer as my little B emoji around this presentation today. I'm originally from San Diego, California, but I live in London now. I came here for a master's degree in international film business a little over 2 years ago. I am a lawyer. I practiced intellectual property and entertainment law for a while, and I'm licensed in California. And after I was done with law school, I had some money left over for school and decided to get a master's degree, which I did here in London at the University of Exeter and the London Film School. After I was doing my dissertation for the master's program, I was starting to think a lot about my career move because I focused in my dissertation on legal technology and how you can use technology within the film industry to increase access to lawyers and legal representation and counsel for film students and early career filmmakers. So I designed an app and a business model for an app that allows filmmakers to connect with lawyers for free using a creative way of having companies pay for ad space and different parts of this different model. So during that time, I met a woman named Kate Ho, who is an amazing technologist who started a company called Vala. And I worked for her after graduating from my master's degree and decided after that to really pursue the technology side of things and the development side of things, because while I was working there, I hosted a workshop where I got to use Documate to help people find resources when they've been discriminated against at work. So after that time, I really honed my craft while I was working as a pro documator for gig law with Haley Leviashvili. And really felt like I wanted this to be my thing, my niche, was that I wanted to be an expert in this system, as well as a little bit of code. I'm not a professional developer in the full stack sense, but I do have some basic coding knowledge, and I'm going through a course on front-end development right now. And I think it's really important that we all understand and be aware of this imposter syndrome. Like, just because I don't have a degree in that doesn't mean that I can't do anything with code at all, that I'm not allowed. So it's something that we'll talk about later in this presentation as well, around innovation and creativity and keeping your identity small and pliable. After I worked at Gig Law for a while, I was invited by Dorna, who's the CEO of Documate, to be their global ambassador to law schools, which is really exciting. And I'm so honored and privileged to have that position. So I have the great privilege of empowering and inspiring law students with the tools they need to succeed in the shifting landscape that is the legal industry, with the tool to succeed because they are going into this having learned all of these different aspects of the law, but not necessarily the practical skills of how to thrive in the modern law practice. So I speak at different schools and represent Documate in that way. I'm also the creator and host of Lightning Talks for Legal Innovators, which happens once a month. And the next one is January 26th, so feel free to join us. And I'm also the creator of this series, which just starts today. And I'm super excited to be here. And I'm also the creator of a digital magazine that we're going to actually highlight here today called Code Word Hex, which just launched the other day. And I'm also the founder, a course creator, and a senior instructor at Chromium Academy, where we have Documenter certification courses and courses in things like software and Airtable and Zapier and Notion and all sorts of stuff. So do check that out. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go over a couple of things. So the reason why I called it "The Cat is Fine" is because of this old saying that curiosity killed the cat. And in my view, curiosity doesn't kill cats, it propels innovation. And I feel like for what we're going to talk about today, this is really important to understand because I feel like there's often a fear of trying new things and going outside of our comfort zone because there's a feel of failure. And especially with lawyers, since I'm a lawyer and not everyone on the call will be a lawyer, but as lawyers, we're kind of trained in law school to be very competitive and to be the best, and that we will only be able to make it in the legal industry if we are perfect and getting the best grades and we have every single thing on our resume, from extracurricular activities to moot court to all sorts of stuff, to law review and everything else. And I think what that does is it creates within our minds this feeling that we have to be perfect, and it actually limits us and makes us fear and push down maybe our curiosity. So we'll go over what I'm going to call these 4 building blocks, and these are 4 ideas around how you can stimulate more innovation and creativity into your no-code and low-code development. And when you're building different things with Document or in other tools. Also, I'll go over some announcements, and then if there are any questions at the end, and also how you can get in touch with me if you have any questions, and how you can network with me if you would like. So let's get into what I'm calling these 4 building blocks. So when we talk about these 4 building blocks, I'm talking about a framework and a mindset and an approach to building tools, building apps, building websites, building businesses, just anything that you can apply this formula and this approach in many aspects of your life. So the first rule is ABN and N, which stands for always be noticing and noting. So start phrases and sentences like, I noticed that, and I've noted that, and make that a daily practice. And it kind of comes, and we'll go into this a little bit more when we get there, around meditation and mindfulness and how you can cultivate a practice of awareness. And a slight distance, there's this kind of idea of this gap in meditation of a noticing and a reaction. So it allows you to take one step back away from a situation, which allows you to have greater clarity. So we're saying when we're approaching something, we can take that step back and live in that gap space before we react and think about and notice something that we may not have seen before if we had just straight jumped into our reaction. The other part of this is the I've noted that, and which goes into this idea of your second brain, which we'll go into in the next slide. So rule or building block number 2 is ABC, always be curious. So this is the idea of starting sentences with phrases and words like, I wonder if I could build a magazine using Document. I wonder if I can use Jinja in the code editor, or in the document editor, I mean. I wonder if I can use HTML in Airtable. I wonder if I could make a blog using just Document, or whatever else. So just starting sentences with and approaching situations with a sense of openness and curiosity really, really stimulates innovation here. The third rule or building block is ABR and L, which is always be reading and learning. So there's something in the notes of Atomic Habits that refers to a person I can't think of at the moment, but I'll take a note too to look up, which is someone who says, knowledge compounds. It's never wasted, it's only stored. So I really love this because it's so true. No experience is ever wasted. It's only stored to be called upon in later experiences, which as we've seen in sort of child psychology or in trauma research, is that sometimes with, let's say, PTSD patients, this storing of information and knowledge and experiences can lead to problems. But when we're talking about things like building applications, building websites, building innovative and creative different tools, then anything that you can store as from any book can inspire you in your builds. So for example, reading something in a book called Your Creative Brain by Shelley Carson inspires some of these rules or some of these building blocks. This idea of premature cognitive commitment is from me reading that book, which we'll comment on later. But the idea is I was reading a book that doesn't have anything to do with the law. It doesn't have anything to do with development. It doesn't have anything to do with anything that you would say is related to what I'm actually doing from a technical standpoint. But it inspired a mindset and an approach to building that I think is really valuable and that I've taken forward in my builds. The learning aspect refers specifically to taking courses or so reading and learning could be also podcasts and everything else, but it's just that idea of gathering and storing as much information that you can later call upon in different situations as much as possible and all the time. So you would use phrases in such as I read that and or I remember learning that. And what we're going to do in the next slide is actually put all of these different pieces and building blocks together in a sentence and I'll give examples of what this looks like in your builds. So the fourth building block is ABY PS, which means always be your pliable self. So we're going to talk about pliability. We're going to talk about keeping your identity small and pliable, and openness to this idea. There's a book called Personality Isn't Permanent, and it's really important to think about how we identify ourselves and how we identify the different tools and aspects of a tool that or a platform that we encounter and use, because when you give it a label, you actually limit your ability to be creative with that tool because you've shut yourself off and your mind off from any possibilities of it being anything else other than what you've already told yourself that it is. So as I said, this is a framework that you can use in your builds, but also in your life as you think about your future, as you think about what you want to do in your life, what you want to be, how you want to behave and operate in the world. So just keeping this framework in mind. But in our particular case, we're going to apply it now to innovation and creativity in no code and low code development or building. So let's put these all together in a sentence as an example. So our coding cat, who's our featured guest for today, is going through its day, doing cat things, building awesome apps with its little paws, and wants to learn how to add bullet points to their workflow or their build. So it moses on over to Documents Learning Center and reads through the help article. And then as it's reading through, it says, I noticed that the Learning Center says that you can use Markdown in the editor. So I've noted that in my second brain in Notion for future reference. I wonder if the editor can also read other programming languages too, since I've also noticed that there is HTML mentioned on the Markdown page. I remember that I learned how to center something using HTML in my She Codes Basics course. I keep my mind open and my identity small. So even though I'm a lawyer using what's been branded as a no-code legal tech tool, I will remain open and not be prematurely cognitively committed to that label and go ahead and try to use HTML to center something. in my build. So let's look at what this looks like in real time and in real life. So let's go first to this example. So in this example, I'm in a demo workflow, for example. I'm in this is Documate, by the way, if you don't have a Documate account or you haven't used it before. That's the playground dashboard where you can create new workflows very quickly. You just say new workflow. I can say demo workflow, let's say the Wednesday build 1.1. And then we've created this workflow now. So now we're into the editor, which is where you can do lots of different things, but create basically this is a very powerful tool to create different workflows and builds, websites, and whatever else. So in our case, let's say I am trying to build something that will automate something that has to do with probate administration or whatever else. So let's just say probate administration questionnaire. And the first thing that we need to do is, ask for the person's name. So I always say, like, what is your name? And then whatever else. So let's just say like client first name as the variable. So variable is a way of referring to this question or this block in other places, either throughout your build or in documents or in other workflows, and it makes it to where you can tie everything together. So variables are really, really important. It can have their own Wednesday build episode by themselves, and probably will have their own. But let's just say before I started to ask them questions, I wanted to give them some instructions. So let's say this is for a new client, and maybe I want to say like welcome, and I want to tell them their services, like what services we offer. So welcome to blah 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 law firm, like we offer services in, and then we wanted to be able to do a bullet point that says estate administration, I don't know, whatever else you want to say, like wrongful death claims, and guardianship matters, or whatever else you'd like. But when you run this the way that it is right now, it looks like this, which is not really how we want it to look, right? We want this to maybe be in a different format. So as our little code curious cat, we want to figure out what we're supposed to do to make this work. So we're gonna go to documate.org, and we're like, they should have some kind of learning portal in here. And so we are saying like bullet points or something, we're searching to say bullet points. So something like this. Okay. Customize font. So it's saying like, okay, if you want to add a bullet point, do an asterisk, and then, okay, and then you do this, and then you can do that. Okay, let's try it. So we're going to go ahead and just try that and see if this works. So we have estate administration, wrongful death claims, and guardianship matters. So now we have bullet points here. That's pretty cool. But instead of so this is where this like method comes in, is that gap we've talked about. So we talked about how in meditation, you have that moment between a stimulus and a response. So within that gap, we want to notice something new. So in our case, what could we notice here? What we could notice is, if we actually read this, what it's telling us is that you can customize the formatting and fonts throughout your workflow using rich text formatting in Markdown. Almost anything is possible formatting wise. If you don't see it below, you can ask us or check out the options here. So as we're looking through, let's see, like, take that moment to pause and say, what other options are there and what am I noticing here? So the first thing I noticed is that they said something called markdown, which at the time that I had first encountered this and was looking, I didn't know what markdown was. So I chose options here. So then I was looking through basic syntax and I was like, wow, you can do so many different things with markdown. But what you also notice is that they keep also mentioning something called HTML. HTML is interesting because this is a no-code editor. So we have in our mind felt like, or thought maybe, that we can't put code in here. But actually, maybe we can. Like maybe we could try it. I wonder if we might be able to try putting it in here, because it seems like this block, even though it's for instructions, it seems like it can take some markdown at least. Maybe it can also take some HTML instructions. So with that being said, maybe I could embed something here, or maybe I could center something. Let's try that. So let's try centering something. And if I didn't know how to do this, in my own personal experience, what actually happened, so now we have this centered, is that I was interested in learning a little bit about coding, not necessarily going all the way into coding, but I was interested enough to sign up for a course called She Codes Basics, which is this one here. And She Codes is a great way of learning how to code because the founder, Matt Delac, is fabulous and a very, very good teacher when it comes to teaching how to code. So I remember, so now we're back to this formula. So Coding Cat's going through its day, building apps, comes across, wants to try to format something, notices that you can use Markdown in the editor. I've noted that in my second brain. So let's talk quickly while we're here about the second brain. This idea of a second brain has to do with reducing cognitive load and overhead. So when you are sort of going throughout your day and you're trying to focus on creating new things, being innovative, and what that requires is headspace and a little bit of peace and calm. And one of the biggest things that can help with that is what's happening is your mind is trying to store everything that you need to remember about every single thing that you do all the time, which is kind of like an engine that's constantly running, and it can burn out if you don't oil it or take care of it properly. And one of the ways you can help with this type of cognitive overload is by taking a huge chunk of that, which could be different coding language, different notes that you remember about this and that thing, and just take that and put it in something called a second brain. So for my second brain, I use Notion. So Notion is the most powerful blank page you've ever encountered, is what I like to think of it as. So I have a quick reference page. So it allows you to just quickly add new pages and they start as a blank page. And you can do all sorts of things with it. So in my case, I like to have sort of a quick reference where I can just quickly have different code and different tags stored so that when I'm doing a build, I don't have to like go back to the help article where I read that the first time, search something, try to remember it, try to store it. I need to be able to work quickly and efficiently. And there's no reason that there's no test we're allowed to reference. There's no proctor who is standing in front of me with a timer saying you have to finish this right now and you're not allowed to look. We have an open book life, you could say. So with that being said, you're allowed to have notes and references and material where you have different things stored. So in my case, I like to have a quick reference. So I have, for example, Document. And I have different things about, like I have even drop down menus where I can just go to this page and it gives me a list of all the states, or whatever else. So in this case, it looks like I deleted this page, but either way. So it makes it to where I can quickly just go ahead and copy and paste this into wherever I want it to go. So that's just to say you should have a second brain if you don't already have one. And for things like this, where you're saying like, oh, I just learned something new actually about Documate that I didn't know before. So I'm going to go ahead and store that in my second brain. So we've said, I noticed that the Learning Center says that you can use Markdown in the editor. So I've noted that in my second brain in Notion for future reference. I wonder if the editor can also read other programming languages too, since I have also noticed that there's HTML mentioned on the Markdown page. So as we've said, my next step was going to be, I remember that I learned how to center something using HTML in my She Codes Basics course. So as we talked about here, we want to always be reading and learning, and that will inspire us in future builds as well. And as I said, knowledge compounds and is stored so that it can be later, so different instances of knowledge can be later retrieved. So in my particular case, I was going about my beautiful life and always trying to do different courses. So like I'm currently taking She Codes Plus, where I'm going to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the VS Code editor, APIs, GitHub, Bootstrap, hosting, and all sorts of things. So this is I'm taking these 3 as well. So I'm going to learn all these different tools throughout this year. And but also I want to learn other things too. So I'm currently also taking a course called Introduction to Notion for Creative Projects by Frances O'Dara Matthews, who is absolutely fabulous, and you should definitely follow her if you don't already. She has a company called the Notion Bar, and the point I'm trying to make with this is around always be reading, always be learning. So I would recommend that you always be taking a course, even if you can just look at something new or try to learn something new from someone else who's tried something different with a different tool for even just 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. I've blocked out at least an hour a day, 5 days a week to focus on the coding course, just because it's so monumentally important to what I want to do and learn. But you can take a shorter course. You can take anything that will help you to just stimulate your brain in different ways and give you ideas for different creative projects. So in the case of my taking the Introduction to Notion for Creative Projects course, I learned about Frances's template that she built called the Notion Zine, which is a magazine layout that she built using Notion. And as you saw, what's really cool about what Frances says about Notion, and what I really like about the way she thinks about Notion, is she noticed that people tend to, oh, Siri wants to talk to me. She noticed that people tend to talk about Notion as a productivity tool, because a lot of people do a lot of things like habit tracking and yearly planning and things like that, and checklists and stuff like that using Notion. But what she says is that Notion is not a productivity tool, it's a possibility tool. And I really, really like that. So what she's done is she's actually made a digital magazine using Notion. So if you notice with Notion, you can add the cover, which is just this kind of picture here at the top. So if I wanted to, I could add a cover here, and you can change this icon to something else. You can make it a custom, you can put your own image there, whatever you like. You can add pictures and numbers and pages within pages within pages, and so on. So what I really like about this is it was really inspiring to me, because I hadn't actually seen anyone use Notion in this way before. So that stimulated my mind to say, I wonder if I might be able to do something similar, not the same. Obviously, it's not good to like copy other people's work. So I wasn't going to try to exactly duplicate what she did. But it's okay to be inspired by other people's work. And I was inspired by her to create something called Code Word Hex, just as a little bit of an experiment, as well as like for fun, and to also be informative and educate people about different kinds of things. And so I built a Code Word Hex using Document as my base editor, because similar to what Frances says about Notion, um, she talks about how Notion is a possibility tool, not a productivity tool. That's the same way that I actually think a lot about Document, because Document is very much directed and branded towards lawyers and like legal technology, which is completely valid. And it's such a ripe and vast and wide space that you can go very deep into that market, and it can be used very usefully for that demographic. But in my own head, personally, even though I am a lawyer and that I represent Document and I do care about legal technology, when I visualize and think about what I can do with Document, I don't limit myself to legal projects. And when I was doing the course with Francis's, well, when I was doing Francis's course, it inspired me to think of what's possible. I wonder if I could make something like a blog / digital magazine using Document. So that's what I've done here. And I've used a mix, a hybrid of the no code editor itself. So let's get out of this one, and I'll show you what the back of this Code Word Hex looks like, as well as traditional coding. So things like these backticks are just to show you, like, to show code. So it should show something as code. And then if you notice on this page, which is the back side of this, you'll see things like HTML and things, different kinds of, there's script here because of this is this is something that I got from an embed from a Vimeo recording. You see Markdown, and you see all sorts of different stuff, because I got curious about how I could recreate something like that. On this other side, because Document allows you to add things like page logic, question logic, you can have minimum and maximum characters. So it really, really allows you to do a lot of different things. I made it to where you have to enter code, and so you have to do it correctly or else it won't work. So you must have at least 3 characters. So let's say you do 3 characters, but it's not correct. Then you're taken to a kickout page that prompts you to try again. And then when you do put it in correctly, you're taken to this issues page where you can see different issues of the magazine. And I was able to just test. I just wanted to see, like, I wonder if you can use Markdown within an option, a multi-select option. So this is a multi-select question. And I just thought, I wonder if you can try it. Like, it's not going to break anything. I can always, like, at this point, I was very early in the build. So I was like, I can just create it again, or I can make a new block. So having a little bit of less stress about your builds is going to be good. One thing I'll note is I always have a testing environment as well. So I have this one called testing environment, where whenever I want to just try something, but maybe I have a really complex build that I don't want to just don't want to touch anything and don't want to mess anything up. Or if I just heard about a new feature and I just want to try it out. For example, I was testing nested repeating items, and I wanted to just try to see how I can use that and what I needed to do, and so on and so forth. It just makes it to where you have less pressure and stress about it. And for example, too, if I'm doing some Slack support, if somebody in the Slack community asks a question and I want to try it out, then I can do that in the testing environment and not worry too much about it affecting anything else. So this is okay that I'm deleting all this stuff, because this is just an environment and a place for me to try new things. So another tip that I'll give you really quick while we're here in the dashboard is I also have a template for myself to refer to see what all of the question types look like on the other side. So I have all question types examples. So when you run this, it's literally just, this is what a text question type looks like. This is help text. This is what a text area question type looks like. Just so that I could see in my visually what each of these things do. And I can remember how, or I can visualize how a build might look before I make it. So that is something that you can do if you like as well. So as we come back around to what I was saying about this idea of creativity and innovation in your builds, let's go back to our sentence. So we've talked a little bit about always be noticing and noting. So we're saying, I noticed that you're allowed to use Markdown in this. I wonder if I could also use HTML in different ways within Document or whatever you're using. I read that, or I remember learning in my She Codes Basics course that you can center something using this particular syntax or element, you could say. And because even though this has been labeled as a legal tech tool, and even though it's also labeled as no code, I am not going to be what's called prematurely cognitively committed to those labels so that I can keep my mind open. And I also, one was relating to my identity of who I am. I'm a lawyer with not that much coding experience. Then you limit yourself and you put yourself in this hole that you don't have, this box, I mean, that you don't have to put yourself in. So let's talk a little bit about that idea of different things like this. So this one, let's just continue this one on for a second. So as we relate this a little bit more to the digital magazine that I made called Code Word Hex, is that I went through and I just said, I wonder if I can underline this. I wonder if I can make bullet points. I wonder if I can make text smaller. I wonder if I can make it to where when an image goes in, because it's hard to like resize it necessarily, like I don't know how to resize it. I wonder if I can use IMGBB instead. And I wonder if you can link that. And I wonder if, because that makes it easier for someone to be able to zoom in and see it. I wonder if you can change the destination of where that person goes when they click on it. And I was able to do that. I wonder if, all these different things, just I wonder. If you just keep that sense of curiosity and wonder, you will accomplish amazing things. One of the things too that I'll note that will be in the next issue of Code Word Hex is I had my mom here for 28 days in December, and it was so much fun to have her. And she has been a really great example of Duolingo as a super top performer in Duolingo. She always, we'd had a long day and we're so tired. But by the end of the day, she still sits down and says, I need to do my lesson, even if it's just one, even if it's really short. And I kept hearing this dinging when in the house, because I have a smaller flat. And I would just hear this little like ding, ding, ding all day. And then as soon as she left and I got back home, I almost started crying because it was so quiet in the flat and I just missed her terribly right away. But I felt like I could have a little piece of her if I just started doing Duolingo. So I decided to start learning French. And I don't know why, I just thought that might be interesting. And I just think the language is really beautiful. And I actually studied linguistics as, so I majored in history and minored in linguistics in college. So I've decided to try to learn French, and I'm not very good yet, but I like the gamification and the just like the playfulness and fun of Duolingo, and that they're each very mini short lessons, and you sort of like build that habit over time and build those skills over time. So this goes back to what we're talking about in our talk today, because it relates to this idea of like noticing and then being curious and then relating it to something that you're doing and so on. So actually the next issue of Code Word Hex will be me reverse engineering how Duolingo works. So if we try to practice Duolingo, the way that it works is you hear something like two and you choose what the answer you think it is, and that's the little ding. And then you move on. So when I was thinking about how might I be able to recreate this, I said, well, how do I make it to where I can have, if I go back to that little thing where it has something play a sound, I thought, well, I could use a YouTube video. I could embed a YouTube video with the sound, but it also made it to where I could think, well, what if I wanted my own voice recorded? And that question led me to Google online recorder. I think it was like online voice recorder with embed. And I saw this thing called Reverb. And Reverb allows you to record instantly on your computer or even on your phone as well. And you can have an account as well where your recordings are stored, and allows you to just quickly grab the embed link. And I just threw that into my workflow and made it to where when someone is in the language learning tool, which I'm starting to build here, for this particular build. I think actually it's in this one. Yeah, so it's in the question before this, I believe. So let's just try this really quick. It's here. So I was able to just pop that in here. And I was just from thinking like, I wonder if I might be able to make it to where I can record myself saying something and then embed that recording into my workflow so that when someone clicks on it, they can hear it and then also choose, similar to how it was in Duolingo. So that's kind of the flow that we're talking about here when we talk about the B's 4 building blocks, is this mindset around innovation and creativity that has you thinking broadly and thinking openly about what's possible, and then just knowing a few key things to look for. Look for things that are in Markdown, look for things that are HTML, look for things like understand different pieces of code. Just a little bit would get you a long, long way. And it would at least get you knowing what to Google. Like I needed to Google something that had an embed so that I could just grab it and copy paste it into my workflow. And so in this case, I grabbed a different one and I made Hello World. So moving on from there, the one after this for the digital magazine issue number 3, I was starting to think, I was walking around, and this has to do with like drawing from your life experience, which will be the next Wednesday build topic. It relates to the idea of walking around in your life and having a life that you can be inspired by. So I was walking around a bookstore and I saw this book that I read during when I was in a book club, and it's by Charlie Mackesy, and it's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And it's by far one of the best and most beautifully drawn and illustrated books I've ever read. And I'll show you here because it will be hard to see, but this is the author who is also the artist, and they're doing an exhibition here in London, I believe. And even just looking at these make me a little bit emotional, because he has stuff in there like, imagine how we would be if we were less afraid. And it has things like, nothing beats kindness, said the horse. It sits quietly beyond all things. It's just like such a beautiful, like beautifully phrased, beautiful book and story and idea, and the illustrations are just amazing. Anyway, so I walked past it, and the reason why it's getting promoted right now is because they have a new version out of the book that's an animated story, and they had a movie that came out as well. So I picked up the book, and then when I was walking around and thinking about Document and thinking about building, I thought, well, I wonder if you could have an escape room kind of setup with the answers being something that someone would have to find in the book or on the author's webpage or on the author's Instagram or whatever else. Like, for example, if you had a question, because we have different logic and we could do a lot of different things with Document. Maybe I could say, like, what did the boy say to the mole after, you know, or like, what did, let's see, like, what did the mole say to the fox or whatever else? And then the answer is like cake or a cake emoji or something like that. So, and then that unlocks a different door. So when you start to think a lot about how this goes and like what you want to try to do, it's just allowing yourself to just try something and to be inspired by your life all over the place. When you're in a bookstore, when you're walking down the street, when you see a new face, when you're at a museum, when you're watching a film, when you're reading a book, when you're reading a poem, when you're talking to your partner, when you're talking to your friend. So it's being inspired by life and taking that time to notice that will allow you to be more creative in your builds. Now, the final point I will talk about is this idea around that I mentioned, keeping your identity small and pliable. So, like I said, even though I'm a lawyer using what's been branded as a no-code legal tech tool, I will remain open and not be prematurely cognitively committed to that label, because what that does is it limits you if you don't do that. So this idea of keeping your identity small has been attributed to this February 2009 post by Paul Graham, who is he's a programmer, writer, and investor, and he created ViaWeb with Robert Morris, which was later acquired by Yahoo in 1998, and so on and so on. And he's also really well known for being one of the founders of Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator. So he started it with these other lovely people. And so in his article, he says, he talks a little bit about how people get really rigid about politics and they get really rigid about religion, even if they don't have any sort of, expertise in such a topic. They still really, really align themselves with, let's say, a political group or religious organization. And so he just thinks about that and he finds that very interesting. And he says the most intriguing thing about this theory, which is this idea that, like, if people would just drop that, we could have better, more open conversations. He says the most intriguing thing about this theory, if it's right, is that it explains not merely which kinds of discussions to avoid, but how to have better ideas. If people can't think clearly about anything that has become part of their identity, then all other things being equal, the best plan is to let as few things into your identity as possible. So this is that idea of keeping your identity small. So instead of saying, I'm a lawyer and I am a legal technologist, because if you even just look at that phrase, I'm saying law, and legal. But I also see myself as a creator and an educator and a writer. But at the same time, I can just be like, I am a person who loves to create things. And I love to build things. And I love to connect with people. And that's probably enough. So if I just stay there in that space of having that small identity, instead of putting all these labels, I'm a lawyer and I'm this and I'm that and I'm all these different things. Instead, you can just say, I'm a person who loves to build things and solve problems and play, and then just go from there. So this next idea around pliability, I first this goes back to being inspired by the things that you read and the things that you do. So I was watching a YouTube video of a girl or a woman who has a really great channel, and I'll have to look up her name, where she tries out different workout programs, and she tries out different workout programs for however long of a time they say, let's say 30 days or whatever else. And she tells you like about her experience and then kind of gives you some tips about how to do it or whatever else. So this woman had done one on the TB12 method, which has to do with Tom Brady, who's a football player, as many people know. And he is really, really, so I ended up getting his book and reading it. And he talks a lot about the importance of pliability for muscle strengthening and lengthening and to avoid injuries, and to how he's been able to play at such a high level for so long in his career. So he says, pliability describes the state in which your muscles are long, resilient, and move without restriction, enabling them to absorb and dispense forces. So unlike short and dense muscles, pliable muscles allow you to perform and train at your best while avoiding injury. Pliability primes your muscles for efficient performance, so you can train better, recover faster, and prevent injury regardless of your activity level. So he talks a lot about like deep tissue manipulation. So, but the idea is that instead of your muscles being like really tight and compacted, you should rub them out with like a very strong foam roller and constantly be rolling, and keeping them very like pliable and spongy, you could say, flexible, so that they can absorb impact. So you can think about that in the same way with your mind and your identity, allowing it to be more flexible rather than rigid, as Paul Graham talks about in his article. And also with that, you can do that when you're thinking about approaching different situations, not only in your identity, but also individual situations. And the reason why I say that is I'm also reading a book by Dr. Shelley Carson called Your Creative Brain, which I highly, highly recommend. I actually have it on Audible, bought it on Kindle, and also have it coming in the mail in a hardcover, because it talks about the Creates brain sets, which has to do with this model that she created, which is connect, reason, envision, absorb, transform, evaluate, and stream, which talks about like flow. And she's really, really good about explaining all of these in her book, so I'll allow her to do that. But in the absorb brain set, she talks a lot about open-mindedness. And she has this great quote in there where she says, let me just open it here one second. She said, in contrast, she talks about the difference between the contrast, mindfulness, and mindlessness. So she says, in contrast to mindfulness, the state of mindlessness is characterized by pigeonholing experiences, ideas, and people into rigid categories. Ellen Langer calls this tendency to judge or categorize without reflection premature cognitive commitment. For instance, imagine your reaction to seeing a drawing of a chair. If you immediately identify it as a chair, you've made a premature cognitive commitment to see it as a piece of furniture on which one sits. By doing so, you've reduced the probability and that you'll be able to see its myriad other realities. It could also be a table, a weapon, firewood, a stepping stool, or a work of art. Turned on its side, it could be a barricade or a fence. By absorbing this object in an open manner, by suspending judgment or categorization, you can see a world of possibilities that disappear when you label it a chair. So this goes back to what I was saying about your identity, as well as how you approach different tools that you use when you're building. So the reference as well to premature cognitive commitment by Ellen Langer is also found here, where she says, she just examined the effects that the conditions of initial exposure to information have on the mindless processing of that information and its subsequent use. It was hypothesized that the context of initial exposure to information limits its subsequent use. So if someone says, this is a chair, and you've heard that, then you then identify it as a chair, which is one of the things that I was saying about Documate being a no-code legal tech tool, when you can actually use it as a code editor, almost in place of VS Code, or in place of VS Code, even though VS Code is amazing and I use it myself, but also just to say, it doesn't have to be labeled as no code. It can also be with code, it can be low code, it can be full code. It can be a whole mix of all these different things. And it doesn't have to be legal technology. It can also be a digital magazine. It could also be a language learning course. It could also be an escape room. It could also be any myriad of other things that you can think of, because if you drop the label of what it is, then you're able to open your mind to the possibilities of what it could be and how it could be for you. And so what I will do now is just kind of recap and wrap up. Um, so let me just go over this sentence one more time. Let's go over the rules one more time. We'll go over the sentence one more time, and then we'll wrap up. So as I said, this is B's 4 building blocks. So always be noticing and noting. So I noticed that, I've noted that, using your second brain. I suggest notion, but you can do something else. The second one is always be curious, starting sentences with I wonder if, thinking about the world and thinking about your builds in this kind of mindset of wonder. Always be reading and learning. I read that, and or I remember learning that, taking courses, reading books. They don't have to be related to what you're actually doing from a technical standpoint, and probably better if they're not in some ways, because of that kind of creates brain set model, because there's different states of mind. Sometimes you're absorbing information, sometimes you're executing on some information, sometimes you're imagining, and so on. And then always be your pliable self. And one last note about this, your pliable self, is this idea of being yourself always, like injecting your own personality and your own life experiences into your builds, which is what we're going to talk about in next week's session. So as I mentioned, you can take a note of this sentence. I noticed that, I've noted that, I wonder if, I remember that, I learned, I keep my mind open, and my identity small. And then let's go into announcements. So that's it for today's sort of session. So let's just talk a little bit about a couple of things to note. So the Wednesday build is this weekly live series, and we have one next week. I'll go over the topic on the next slide. Code Word Hex is a free interactive digital magazine. As you saw, new issues are out every Tuesday. Next week, we're going to talk about how I reverse engineered Duolingo. And then courses, we have courses on the Cormam Academy website on Software and Airtable, with other ones to come, things around Notion and Zapier and things like that. We also have Documate certification courses if you'd like to be certified in Documate and get your basic silver or gold badges. Fellowships, we are just launching from the Documate side, the Law Students in Legal Tech HJ Fellowship, which will start in 2 weeks from today. So if you are a law student and you are interested in getting a basic certification, they are going to be, it's a 12-week course, as well as a hackathon competition where there's a cash prize for each of the winning teams. There's also a guaranteed paid position with Gig Law at the end of it. There's also, for the winners of the hackathon, as well as profiles, automated profiles on the Documate website, as well as Accessio docs. There's a ton of really great stuff going into this, and I will be leading the sessions live as well as doing the content for that. So if you are watching this and you're a law student and you're interested in this, you can reach out to me, or you can find this on the Cormam Academy website, and also coming soon on the Documate website. I also have a community for all of my students. So as being part of the Wednesday build, and also if you subscribe to the Code Word Hex, then you will be automatically added as a member of the Cormam global community, where I announce different things that are going on, different pop-ups, different events, and give different tips on how to do all this stuff. And lastly, feel free to also add yourself to the Documate Slack community, which is very active and super helpful. And Documate is always answering questions on there. So kudos to them. And if you do have any questions, you can, since we're running over, I won't pause here for questions, but if you do have them, feel free to just reach out to me via email, or connect with me on LinkedIn, or see me in the communities in Slack or in the Cormam community. And then just thank you for being here so much. I really appreciate all the support, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, the 11th of January at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Same, you can just look in your Think of It course. I'll put this recording in there as well. The topic for next week is I'm not Batman, I'm Peanut Brittle, injecting personality and personal experiences into your apps and workflows. So, as I mentioned, we'll go over kind of the Duolingo language learning tool that I made and a little bit more about how I was inspired by that and different things that I learned and picked up along the way. As I said, you feel free to connect with me on a LinkedIn or via email. You can reach me at Brittany@chromium.pro. If you would like to talk to me about the law school program or the fellowship program, do email me at brittany@documate.org instead. And that is it for today. Thanks again for being here with me. And I'm so excited to do this series with you all. And like I said, if you do have any questions or want to reach out, please do.